Five, four. Welcome to the midweek brief. My name's Anthony, and on behalf of FP Markets, I thank you for attending this video. Please, as always, as I mention at the beginning of every one of these videos, do not hesitate to use our education packages. It's all free for account holders. Our Traders Hub, you've got trading courses, live webinars, podcasts. We've got articles, ebooks, tutorials, videos. Everything you possibly need is in one place, and it's all there for free for account holders. If you need any more explanation or questions, please reach out to our live chat or your allocated point of contact, your account manager. We will proceed with this week. Now, this week will be a bit different. Obviously, we've seen the news. There's a lot going on in the Middle East. So this week, 90% of the time, we're going to speak about the Middle East. Why? Because this is what's fueling the markets. We still have macros, we still have news and economic data coming out of countries, but primarily all eyes are on the Middle East. How do we know this? Well, quite simply, if you have a look at gold, you'll be able to see that it reached all highs several days ago, last week, and now it's quite simply ranging, it's plateauing. Now, what this tells us is that people are sitting back and waiting to see what Israel's response will be. We say response, what will it be? We know there's going to be a response. Israel did say yesterday that they will strike back. They will retaliate for the Saturday night attacks by Iran. So now it's not a question of if, it's now a question of when and in what capacity. So in terms of news sources, the biggest problem we have when it comes to not just the Middle East, we've had it over the years, but especially around the Middle East situation, is your news. Now, I personally am using News Now. It's totally free to use. I'm not sponsored by it. It's nothing like that. There's no cost involved in using this at all. The good thing about it is it takes news sources from all around the world, from different news agencies, and it posts it all in one place. So you can see the correlation, you can get the vibe, you can pick apart the truth. If you see that the Western world is reporting news in one tone and the Eastern world is reporting news in another tone, you can see what's going on. So please get used to it. Use this. News is a very important part of trading, and it is imperative that we get to the truth. Now, the truth is very hard, and we know it's the biggest victim of any war, especially nowadays. We saw this a lot with the Ukraine-Russia. We saw a lot of propaganda, but the whole Israel-Palestine situation, and probably even more so, the Israel-Iran situation has thrown up some major propaganda, especially on the Iranian side. We've seen videos of so-called missiles striking buildings and setting fire to forests. These videos were from Chile several years ago in a mountain wildfire. We saw a video the other day of what was meant to be Israeli jets at an airbase on fire. Again, it was a video from about 8 years ago from US jets in Iraq. So we're seeing a lot of this going on. People are falling for it. You go on social media, you look at the comment section, and it's kind of scary on both sides. I'm not going to be biased or try not to be biased in any way because you don't trade off of my opinion or anybody here's opinion. So we try and just get to the raw truth as much as possible. So what is the truth of what's going on? You'll hear a lot of people talking about how the Saturday attack is in retaliation for what Israel did to the Iranian consulate in Syria, where some Revolutionary Guard commanders were killed and some Hezbollah members. Yes, that was a provocation, and it does explain why Iran attacked. It's not that simple, though. This has been going on for decades. For decades, we've seen bomb and assassination attempts by Iranian-backed groups such as Hezbollah, Hamas, or back in the day, Fatah. These groups have conducted exercises or assassination attempts since the 60s, 70s. Some very big ones. There was one in Paraguay in the 1982, I believe. Several were killed. 1992, Buenos Aires, we can see it here. 1992, 30 people died, up to 300 were injured. This has been going on for many decades now. But if we actually look on the other side of things, a list of Israeli assassinations, we can see Israel have conducted since the 50s and 60s a lot of assassination attempts on various Iranian-tied figures. whether it be political or military. It seems to be that Israel, via Mossad, their intelligence agency, their strategy is to assassinate their enemy, whereas Iran's technique from the past tends to be bombing, more terrorist related activities. So this is not new. So when people turn around the news and say, "Oh, this is what happened on Saturday night was Iran retaliating," but then Israel would just argue that what they were doing was just retaliation for this continuous proxy war. They will argue that Hamas are only existing along with Hezbollah and the Houthi rebels because of Iran, and they are correct. But this also predates that and shows that there has always been assassination, basically a Cold War between Iran and Israel, just like there was between Western Russia. This has been going on for decades now. So that's the truth of the matter. There is no right or wrong side in this whole thing. Yes, a lot of people are dying in Gaza. Most people with any common sense would prefer a ceasefire. Who wouldn't? But what I'm trying to point out to people all the time is try not to believe all the protests. A lot of these people do not understand that this is an ancient problem. It doesn't just go back to the 40s, 50s, and 60s. This has gone on for hundreds of years. It predates Islam. It goes back before the Bible was even written. This is an ongoing problem, and it's very hard to pick a side. So we're just looking for the truth. And the truth is, we can see that both sides have conducted their fair share of assassination and terrorist activities on each other. As I scroll the page, you can see the list goes on and on. 1980s, 1990s, across the world, Brussels, in Lebanon, Paris. We see it in the Gaza Strip directly, Jordan. So that's the truth of what's going on there. If we actually have a look at a map of the region, we can see a few significant developments. We can see that, especially as of today, there has been, and the news is not covering this, but it's according to Israeli sources, Israeli IDF forces have moved heavily over the past 24 hours into the West Bank in this region, usually around the Bethlehem region. Now, some are saying this is aggressive moves against locals. Well, of course it is. I mean, and if you're going into someone's territory, it's considered an aggressive move. However, the IDF is claiming that this is purely to distribute air defense systems along the West Bank. Why? Because this is a blind spot for Israel. If they're receiving incoming air attacks over their airspace of Jordan, Iraq, from Iran to the east over here, then it does make sense that they would like Israel would want to plant or place some air defense systems here in order to protect their blind spot. Now, what happens after that will be what eyes are on. Are they going to stay there and then create new settlements, which has been the very controversial thing that's been happening over decades, which has been condemned? Possibly. Who knows? The unlikely ally that Israel gained on Saturday was Jordan. Jordan and Israel are not necessarily the strongest enemies, but they're not exactly best friends. They had the Six-Day War, they've had a history together. However, over recent years, they have started to sit at the table more, try and strike some trade agreements and things like that. Again, something Iran's not a big fan of, but Jordan's perspective is that they're direct neighbors with Israel, and for security purposes, it makes a bit more sense. Egypt are kind of going down this path slowly as well, not necessarily direct trade agreements, but at least civil agreements to keep things civil. Iran don't like this stability in the region. This is the absolute truth, and they've been trying to undermine it for years. Saudi Arabia, who are staunch enemies of Iran, have actually, the foreign minister came out on Monday and said this is no coincidence, this is all happening, as Saudi Arabia and Israel were ready to strike a historical agreement that would place a trade deal in and some peaceful talks to conclude. It never reached conclusion because everything kicked off. Jordan actually intervened with some of the cruise missiles that were fired from Iran. They shot down some along with the help of Britain, France, the United States, and of course, Israel. There was also some logistical support from neighboring countries as well. This is important to pay attention to because Iran, I don't think, expected countries like Jordan to particularly side with Israel. And they're not necessarily siding with Israel, but what they have stated is they're protecting their airspace and they don't want their land and airspace to be used as a battleground or front line for a war between two countries that is not necessarily involving or relating to them directly. So that's a significant development there. The reason everyone's paying attention to this so much and is afraid is because of the sheer size of these armies involved. We're not talking about two small countries that have a difference of opinion with very small militaries that are easy to contain. This does have all the 1938 to 1939 hallmarks about it, because on paper, Iran are slightly more powerful against Israel. We can see here on this comparison chart, Iran has bigger manpower. They have over 2 million active personnel, whereas Israel has about 600,000, although it has a lot of reservists, but we're talking active personnel. Israel has a bigger air force. Iran has a bigger land power, naval power, national resources, finances slightly. Israel's growing fast in that area, and logistics. Geographically, though, um, Israel's probably got the upper hand as well because it is surrounded one side to the Mediterranean Sea and one sea and the series of rivers to its east. So this plays a big part. Now, the key factor in any war nowadays, it doesn't really matter how many soldiers you have. It doesn't also matter how many tanks or vehicles you have. And we've seen that in the Ukraine-Russia situation. What seems to matter most nowadays is air power. If you can control the skies, you can control the war. If Ukraine was not to receive air defense systems from the West and and upcoming fighter jets deliveries, it wouldn't have survived as long as it did. And I think they can strongly admit that. So this is a very important factor. So this is a real 50-50 thing here. But what Israel will be counting on is its allies, Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia are ranked slightly below Iran in terms of military prowess, 23 out of 145, but it is also one of the fastest growing militaries on the planet, with a deal that has a 40-year backlog order from the United States. So over the next 40 years, it will be receiving constant jets, ammunition, artillery, just to name a few, and it's all been prepaid. So it's a constant flow that will be coming in for them. So give it another couple of years, they'll probably rank from 23 to 15th or even 10th, perhaps. They will probably become the main powerhouse in the region or equal to Iran. We look at other allies, we see the United Kingdom ranked sixth in the world, although smaller military size now compared to Iran, and a lot of countries it has invested heavily into its tanks, into its submarines and navy and air force. This is probably what Israel's relying heavily on, which is why it's not pushed too heavy into Rafah, because they haven't wanted to upset the international community too much. It's a balancing act for them because they still need international support, which is waning at the moment. We see the United States, obviously now ranked number one at the moment, but could change over coming years. This is proof of the power Israel does currently have. It's not just about Israel, it's about its neighboring countries too. And the United States is ranked at number one. And if we have a quick overview, they have a very green heat map. Now, this heat map in terms of military is showing you the amount of areas covered in terms of defense and offense. And the more green you see, just like you would see in the markets, the better it will be. We can see that in terms of manpower, they have 149 million in terms of reserves, fit for service, 123 million, active personnel, 1.3, probably fluctuate to 1.4 million end of this year. Quality over quantity is a big thing nowadays. We've seen this in recent conflicts, so it's not just about manpower. Technically, Iran has one of the biggest artillery arsenals on the planet, but it's very outdated too. And what we did see on Saturday was the launch of cruise missiles, very old ones from the 70s and 80s, which took about 3 to 4 hours to reach Israel. Israel knew this. They have good intelligence. They have connections in Saudi Arabia. They knew it was coming and they were placed for it. 99% of all missiles and drones were struck down. From a military perspective, looking at the analysis, that is borderline miracle. And this is not saying this in defense of Israel. From a military perspective, it was a huge achievement. Hence why America's saying perhaps you should take this as a victory. Again, this is America confusing things. One minute they want a ceasefire, next minute they're saying, oh, this is a victory, but calm yourself down, don't retaliate. They're giving off very mixed signals. This wasn't a victory, it was a success. There's a difference in that. A victory is when you win the overall war and you achieve your ultimate target, whatever it may be. The success is winning a battle within the war. What Israel achieved on Saturday was a major success, but it wasn't a victory. It has now reached a point where they're caught between a rock and hard place. If they retaliate, they get international condemnation. If they don't retaliate, then perhaps they set a precedent in the region for further attacks, knowing that there will be no punishment. So this is a very different, delicate situation, and hence why I said it's very hard to pick a side. If we actually go and see, right, who are Iran's allies. We know Russia's an ally, but something makes sense now. Last March, Russia held a conference with Iranians, China, their allies, and it turned out to be a military showcase of latest equipment. Iran have actually struck a deal, and they will be receiving air defense equipment, logistical equipment, ammunition from Russia to help in their defense or any possible defense. We knew this was going to happen. People are condemning it. At the end of the day, it's kind of hypocrisy because the Western countries can make deals amongst themselves. Why can't Russia and Iran if they're allies? I don't like to see the double standard in these things. Regardless if you even like Iran or Russia, that's not the point. But double standards applies to everyone here. If we actually see regarding Biden and going back to what I said about the mixed signals is this is the unbiased part come through, or the biased part coming through. Biden seems very confused now, or the Democratic Party, because a few months ago they wanted to veto any ceasefire attempts with Gaza. Then they wanted a ceasefire. Then they condemned Israel for their heavy-handedness in Gaza, which I understand, but at the same time are still supplying previous weapon agreements with them. And now they're saying, take this as a victory on Saturday night and don't retaliate. So they're very mixed signals. People are not taking America seriously at the moment at all. That is fact. We all seen that. How does this affect the markets? This all affects gold. This all affects oil. These are the assets that are likely to come into question over coming days, weeks, and months. If Saudi Arabia get involved heavily, it's going to affect oil. Gold is sitting back waiting to shoot up or down. If we can calm this down and ceasefires get agreed, gold could drop like we've never seen it drop. But if things escalate, it could go to heights, well, that we've never seen before, and we've already experienced that recently. But we can see here Iran's brazen attack directly targeting Israel on Saturday means that one thing President Biden most feared and desperately sought to avert in the wake of the 7th of October Hamas attack has happened, an escalation of the conflict to the wider region. But why has that happened? Quite simply, mixed signals. People need strong leaders. People say, oh, but leaders are corrupt. People don't care if leaders are corrupt so much. They want them to lead, do what they're assigned to do, what they're hired to do, and what they were voted to do. And at the moment, a lot of Western leadership is very weak at the moment. And Israel knows this, Iran knows this, Syria, Hamas, Houthi rebels, they know this, China knows this. And this is why things are heating up coincidentally as we get closer to November, because there is strong indication, and Trump has made it public, if he becomes president, he will end the war in Ukraine and he will sit down and sort this Israel situation out. And people want that. And that is going to be his wild card. That's going to be the thing that probably, looking at the statistics, will get him into power. That's not a personal preference or opinion. It's just the likelihood. We look at opinion polls and he's gaining day on day. It doesn't help when Biden then comes out and says, do you know what? Totally off topic. I'm thinking of releasing Julian Assange, the whistleblower. Well, that's fantastic. People have been calling on this for the past few years. Trump's been calling on it. No one really paid attention. In fact, when Trump called upon it, people said Trump is a victim, a perpetrator of treason because this guy's a whistleblower and Trump wants to release him. Joe Biden says it and everyone's encouraging him and, imploring him and clapping hands. But this has been discussed for the past few years. We're talking about a whistleblower here who, yes, may be guilty of certain things, but is in prison with no charge. He shouldn't be in there. So it is very clear that Biden is announcing this now to gain votes. And the thing is, timing is key. The fact that he is doing it so late and so close to the election, it is evident to anybody with an IQ that he is doing this for votes. So this is likely to even backfire against them. Whoever is calling the shots in the Democratic Party really needs a job appraisal because it's not going well for them. Every decision they're making is backfiring. Or we could only assume that they're doing this on purpose for whatever reason that may be. So, although this is not directly affecting the Middle East, the Julian Assange case, it is showing the lack of leadership and decision making and desperation from the Democratic Party in the West, in America. If we go switch over to the Yemen situation, which is linked to the whole Iran-Israel thing, because the Houthi rebels are backed by Iran, we're still seeing some attacks on the cargo ships. We're now seeing Russian ships, Israeli ships. An Israeli ship was uh, taken in by Iran. This is actually considered an act of piracy. Usually it's a declaration of war, but because of the current situation, they're basically in a situation of war anyway. But one thing that the news is not covering, and I've looked everywhere, but it is happening because I monitor these maps every day, is that the government forces, with the backing of Saudi Arabia to the north, are actually slowly gaining more ground in Yemen. We can see it to the northwest here. This enclave was only around this big a few weeks ago. Now they have doubled the size of that. We've seen a small enclave to the north open up here through some shelling from the Saudi army. And to the south, we're seeing government forces pushing upwards and gaining some more territory. So this is going on. This is another proxy war that is not being covered. But if we go back 2 months ago, everyone was talking about the Red Sea. So this is an ongoing thing. And this explains why Iran are extra cautious because they can see Saudi Arabia's capability with what they're achieving in Yemen that nobody is covering. So to have Israel, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, America, Britain, France, all these countries together, Iran doesn't have a chance, even if it is allies with Russia. If we go and have a look and see here, Iran has actually moved all of its, not all of it, but a huge part of their S-300s, their anti-aircraft missile systems, to the west of Iran in anticipation of any strikes. They are in fear that their nuclear program sites will be hit. This would coincide with Israel's accusations that Iran are a week, 10 days away from creating their first capable nuclear warhead. Whether that's true or not, we have yet seen any official evidence, and I doubt we would because they would say it's top secret. But we did hear similar things in the build-up from Tony Blair and George Bush regarding Saddam Hussein. So we take this with a pinch of salt. This has happened for years too. This is nothing surprising. There's been airstrikes on Iran's nuclear facilities from Israel, from Saudi Arabia. This has happened. So this is nothing new. This is kind of clickbait to amplify the situation. We know that if Israel are going to attack, they're not going to carpet bomb Tehran. They're going to go for nuclear sites, missile sites, things like that. Then Iran are likely to attack and do something similar, and maybe a few assassination attempts, and then vice versa. And this will become a hot/cold war at the same time. So if people are expecting this to become a third world war overnight with millions of troops mobilized fighting, it's not like that anymore. The only reason that the Russia-Ukraine situation, which I'll bring up here, the only reason that has become, let's say, reminiscent of World War One or World War Two is because Ukraine didn't have a navy, but it had an air force. Russia had a big air force, but Russia's weakness, Russia has a big navy, but its weaker aspect is probably its air force in comparison to the West. And Russia had a lot of manpower, but very ill equipped. So what we were seeing was two sides going head to head, forcing a situation to become a landlocked war. Therefore, you have to resort to tanks and infantry. And also, we're not looking at two sides. Yes, Russia have killed civilians, collateral damage, it happens, and we don't like to see it. But we can honestly say that, yeah, apart from a few handful of cases, Russia are not just carpet bombing Kyiv or anything like that. There tends to be a controlled targeting going on. Although, like I said, civilians are dying, but not to the same scale like Gaza. Okay. So therefore, a lot of people, when the war started, were evacuated to the west of Ukraine, and therefore it creates a front line. That's not going to happen with Hamas because they're not an organized army. It could happen with Hezbollah to the north, but with Iran, it's not going to happen either because there's Jordan in between. So a land war is unlikely. So we're likely to see an air war. We're going to see a lot of missiles, drones being used. And on Saturday night, it was the biggest barrage of missiles and drones in modern history. That's why this is significant. Iran knew what they were doing. They knew they weren't going to succeed and cause much damage, but they knew that if they sent a lot of them, it would try and overwhelm Israel's air defense, but also test it out to see for future attempts. But the problem where Iran shot itself in the foot was that they made it too big, that it came across showing the world their capability, and that kind of scares people. When people are scared, they tend to be preemptive and try and take out their enemy before they get taken out. That's the mindset of some countries and their militaries. If I actually bring it right down to the roots of what's causing all of this, well, this isn't the cause of it, but this is possibly the future, is we're going to see the world start getting divided into two. You've got NATO and you've got BRICS. Now, NATO is bigger and more powerful, and primarily it's a military union. But BRICS is now formed. India, China. It was originally formed as a group to compete against Western capitalism, not necessarily against it, but to rival it and come equal to it, and to bring the world to less reliance on the US dollar, which relates to the petrodollar. And we can see currently China have the biggest cap of the BRICS group, along with India, Russia, Brazil, and Saudi Arabia. Now, what makes this interesting is Saudi Arabia and Iran don't get on, but yet they're part of BRICS. People say that's weird, but let's be honest, you've got NATO, where there's certain countries within NATO where countries don't get along with one another, but they are still part of the union. What makes this interesting is at the moment, the BRICS is not a military alliance, but it's showing signs that it could be. And if they form and equal something to NATO, and they call it the BRICS Union, then it becomes a case of just like NATO. If one of these countries attack, then the others have to jump in as well. And that's when it becomes very serious because you've got China and Russia and India. India, one of the fastest growing economies and democracies on the planet. Russia, sheer manpower they have. Yes, they got off to a slow start in the Ukraine war, but they've shown that they're still producing. And they've recently struck the deal with China to finally start selling them more materials so they can reinforce their army. China held off at the beginning because they wanted to see the world's reaction to the invasion from Russia. But now that things have calmed down and all eyes are on Israel and Yemen and this situation, China is starting to sell their precious metals to Russia for microchips. They're starting to sell cheaper steel so they can build more tanks. Russia announced only yesterday they have a new tank in development that will be ready by the end of this year into next year. And this is an example that they are not struggling as we thought. So BRICS is something to keep an eye on. And it would not surprise me that if I was doing this in a year's time, that we would be talking about NATO versus BRICS. It would take many decades for BRICS to get to the same level of power as NATO, but it has to start somewhere. And perhaps this is the start. So as I said, here's the Ukraine situation. No significant individual major developments, except for Russia is supplying, is basically reversing the favor that Iran gave Russia, and it's starting to supply weapons to them. Let's go into macros for the week and take a major curveball, but it's good for us to get back onto the markets. We've got some interesting data coming out over the next few days. We've got initial jobless claims is always a good one, week on, week out tomorrow. A lot of focus will be on the dollar or the euro US dollar. We've got data coming out of Europe. We've got existing home sales out of the United States as well. Inflation rates coming out of Japan on Friday, retail sales as well out of the UK, and PPI out of Germany. These are great macros. The reason it's great is it's diverse. It's not just US dollar. It's not just euro. We've got a bit of everything. We've got GBP. We've got Japanese yen. We've got US dollar. We've got Australian dollar, full-time employment change out as well tomorrow. So there's a lot of to get your hands on. Use the economic calendar. Start to understand what each of these actually means, how they can relate to one another. Things like manufacturing rates, jobless claims, existing home sales affecting mortgage approvals, which is another economic data that come out. The big thing is inflation at the moment, inflation rates. Why? Every time you see that inflation rates, retail sales, consumer confidence on the calendar, it relates to cost of living. It's what we all go through as individuals. I'm sure you can agree. If we actually touch on that, Jerome Powell said that he believes that we're reaching stable inflation data, and hinting that over the coming months or two, he might cut interest rates. It's not happened yet. But coincidentally, on the same day, Jeremy Hunt out of the UK also said that he believed inflation has peaked. Therefore, we might start looking at cutting interest rates. So they're all saying it, they're all hinting it, but nobody's actually done it yet. And like I said, until America or the Bank of England usually cut or hike interest rates, then other countries tend to follow. Sometimes Canada might take the bold move, but with their current leadership and banking system, they seem to lack that confidence. Let's have a quick look at stocks, very simple ones. Let's have a look at Tesla. Why Tesla? I know it's a common one that people talk about, and you should say, oh, Anthony, it's an easy one to talk about. Yes, it is. Like I said, trading's about being a bit of a sheep sometimes and not trying to be too cheeky and thinking outside the box for risk management. But because only the other day, Tesla announced a 10% cut in workforce globally, false articles coming out saying that their sales are down. Their sales are not down. Their delivery, their what they can supply is down. That's a different ball game completely. It's still not good for their stock price. At the end of the day, they just can't keep up with the demand. And for years, investors have been encouraging Elon Musk to build more factories. He's tried. Problem is, they cost so much and they use so much in terms of fossil fuels to make these batteries for the cars. It's not turning out the way that was expected. So as a company, they're not failing. Their product is still good. They just can't keep up with the demand. And this happens year on year. And this explains why their price always takes a dip around this time of the year. Something very similar in terms of Boeing. Two things that Boeing are experiencing why their share price is dropping. One, quality of aircraft that is being sold to airlines. They are starting to notice more and more flaws and technical issues with them. But not just that, they are literally producing a third, maybe half of what their competitors like Airbus are producing each year. Airbus could produce anywhere between 2 and 3,000 aircraft, various aircraft a year, and distribute and sell them to private individuals or airlines. Boeing this year averaged around 900, so a significant drop compared to its competitors. These are the things you look for. Don't need to take too much to think about. Have a look at them. And the last thing I wanted to touch on was, like I said, it was just Jerome Powell. He will be doing some speeches over the coming weeks. Keep an eye on interest rate decisions, the next ones that come out. I'm not saying the next interest rate decisions are going to be the ones that get hiked or cut, but we need to see more of this hinting. What the same thing that we tend to hear is we are waiting for more inflation data. Well, I can do that for you. Just walk down the high street with me. Let's go into a shop and let's have a look at the cost of things. There you are. Let's cut interest rates. But no, we live in different worlds. So to wrap things up, just one last thing, which is in regards to cryptos and Bitcoin. In 3 days, Bitcoin is halving. More will be mentioned in next week once we've seen the effects of that. So if you're a crypto trader, bear in mind Bitcoin is going to halve. Apart from that, I really, really appreciate your time. I know the news nowadays is more negative, but this is what is fueling the market. Eyes are likely to be on gold as a fear indicator and oil because of the region and its production of oil. If you have any questions, reach out to us, contact your account manager, arrange an appointment. I thank you very much. And do not forget to use our Traders Hub. Apart from that, stay safe, everybody. Have a lovely rest of the week.